Not long ago, I adventured to the Cotswolds to spend the day with Marc Newson at his home. I thought I knew Marc well, but entering his house and his world, seeing what he'd created, elegant, warm spaces, incredible attention to detail. The design of a light switch, a door handle, a sofa, a bed, or a bath gave me a deeper insight into this remarkable person. Marc is the industrial designer of our time. The Lockheed lounge chair, when just 25, the Embryo, the Qantas Skybed, the O21C concept car for Ford, and of course, the Apple Watch. Today, on Table 4, Marc is in my home, the River Cafe, where we'll share stories about food and family and design, another adventure with an amazing man. Did we have Thai food? Was it a Thai salad?
I think we had Thai food, or sort of an attempt at Thai food that day.
Yeah, really good. Good cook. Well, you lived in Japan.
My family lived in Japan, actually, when I was a kid, when growing up. And I lived in South Korea as well. So I spent a big chunk of my childhood, traveling and living in the Far East, I guess you'd call it.
So born in
Sydney.
In Sydney.
In Australia.
Tell me about that.
Well, we lived in a multi-generational, household with my grandparents. I mean, my mum was, in her, I guess, early 20s at that point, but working during the days. So I'd come home just...
What did she do? Do you know?
She did a variety
Just
of different sorts of jobs. Mostly sort of secretarial kind of stuff, I suppose. But the point was that she worked. And, so I'd come home from school, go straight to my grandparents' house and spend, an enormous amount of time with them, growing up with my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather, who was an immigrant from Greece.
Was he first generation in Australia, or was it his parents?
He was born in Greece and came by himself. I think he left Greece when he was about 14 years old, as they did back in those days. I mean, that must have been 1920 or something like that. He came to Australia, but he was a big influence on my life. They were incredible times. And interestingly, the one memory that stays with me to this day was my grandfather had. There were two spaces in this sort of household that were sort of his spaces. One was the garage workshop.
Yeah.
The other was the kitchen.
Oh, really?
My grandfather did all the cooking. Yeah,
Your grandfather did?
Yeah, my grandmother wasn't really allowed in the kitchen.
But she was Australian?
She was Australian, of English, sort of Scottish descent. But she literally, she barely went into the kitchen, only occasionally to make tea and toast. But so he would work all day, come back, cook.
What did he do? What was his job?
He had a variety of jobs through his career. I mean, he owned shops in Sydney, everything from what they called milk bars, which were sort of cafes, really. That was the sort of the local name for a cafe, which were all run by Greek immigrants. He owned a barber shop, but he wasn't a barber. And he ended up later in life becoming a gardener. And that was, what he did, for the last sort of 20 years of his life. He was a brilliant, fantastic gardener.
Did he cook Greek food?
I remember it as being mostly Greek in sort of origin. All of the sort of staple.
Tell me about Greek food. What is Greek food?
Well, that's a really great question. I mean, yeah. When I think of Greek food, I think of things like tara masalata. Mm-hmm. It's more the kind of the small things, the sort of meze, tzatziki, something called skodalia, which is basically like
is that the
garlicky mashed potato. I mean, it literally looks like mashed potato.
It's not the one in the triangular.
No. It looks like pomme puree. It looks like sort of mashed potato.
How do you eat that? Do you eat that?
You often have that with cod. With I think it's sometimes it's sort of fried cod, but sometimes it's also steamed cod, and that's a really particular recipe. But it's literally liquefied garlic. I mean, it's this stuff. I mean, it's like so strong. So they're the sorts of things that I remember kind of growing up. Growing up with. Of course, my half of the family, well, most of the family, I guess, were sort of Anglo-Saxon, right? So everything that he cooked was sort of watered down Greek. But there was a huge Greek community in Sydney and in Australia. So Greek food was something that was not common, but it wasn't uncommon.
Isn't it, in this world we're in right now of the fear of immigration, you realize the wealth that immigrants bring to a country.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so what would Australia be without the Greek and without Greek food?
Well, the Greeks, the Italians, the Lebanese, the Mediterranean culture, in fact, is, and that's why I suppose, after that, maybe even decades after that, Sydney became
Still
a bit of a kind of a food
place.
Food
place, yeah.
Yeah, and it's for that reason.
To
His parents stayed in Greece.
Oh, they stayed.
Yeah,
with who?
He came by himself. Yeah,
14,
maybe even 13. That's what happened back then. He was the oldest of I think 8 or maybe even 9 children, and he was sent off to the New World. He first went to South Africa, which was the route. I mean, there were all these sorts of shipping routes that and the Greeks were big sort of merchant marines. And that was what they did. And he went to stay with relatives who had already established themselves in South Africa. And he came back to Greece once for the rest of his life. In his whole life. So I guess, he never saw his
parents again.
Never saw his father ever again. But eventually he brought his mother out to Australia, but she was by that point, quite old. And
what was the promise of that?
But I think there had been precedents, So my grandfather's father had already been to Australia at the end of the 19th century there was a gold rush.
Yeah.
So he'd gone to Australia during the gold rush, made a fortune, come back to Greece. So people had already been traveling, to these faraway places for, a generation or two before that. So it was far away and it took a long time to get there, but it was known. But those trips took years, not weeks. The island that my grandfather came from is called Ithaca, and almost all of the people emigrated, or everybody had someone from their family that emigrated, and they went to one of 3 places. It was either South Africa, Australia, or the US. To New York specifically. I guess maybe that's why there's an Ithaca in New York. I'm not quite sure.
Not far from where I live.
Oh, really?
Well, I'm from upstate New York. Ithaca, that's where Cornell is.
Oh, yeah, right.
And Richard taught.
It's hysterical going back. I go to Ithaca.
I know, you have a house there.
Yeah, we have a house there. And at certain times of the year, you'll only hear American, South African, or Australian accents.
Because
all of
they've
these
all
families
coming back.
have kind of come back to, coming back to visit, or they've inherited a bit of family property or something like that. It's really, really funny. I get my sort of, my annual dose of Australia in Ithaca, not in Australia. Yeah.
Tell me about growing up then. What you come home from school and
my mum was so young. She was out working. I'd come home from school because she wouldn't get home from work until sort of 6 or even 7 p.m. And we'd all eat together.
Teenagers,
me,
right? Yeah.
my mum, my mother's brother, my uncle, my grandfather and grandmother. So it was the 5 of us, and we'd have, kind of a family meal.
And he would
in the
cook.
evening. And he would cook.
Yeah.
He would do everything. I mean, he was sort of slightly obsessed with the notion that if you wanted to do something properly, you have to do it yourself. And I'm afraid I'm sort of afflicted with...
Are you kind of like that?
Yeah, sadly. I can't...
Well, nice for all of us that you can do that.
A bit of a control freak.
It sounds really warm and nice.
It was. It was fantastic.
Can I ask you about your father? Did you ever see?
So my father left.
Was he as young as your mom?
I think he, maybe a few months older, or maybe a year, but he wasn't really on the scene. I didn't meet my father until about 10 years ago, actually. Oh. So he'd completely sort of disappeared when I was, not long after I was born.
Yeah.
So he wasn't present at all, in that period of time. But I guess, my family was that extended family, really. It was all of those people. It was, it was grandparents and uncle and mother. And I didn't feel that I sort of wanted for a father figure as such. There were plenty of men around, like my grandfather and uncle, that were
and they're probably quite
showing
young.
me what to do. But I was always really independent anyway. I'd go off and sort of make things. I was obsessed with making things.
Yeah, making. You said that in the garage he had a workshop. What was that?
Yeah. The garage was really a place to fix things, to kind of a DIY space with tools and stuff, I mean, bits of wood and tools. And it was a place where I spent almost all of my time, making things, learning how to sort of build things by myself.
So you knew at quite an early age that you wanted to make things.
Absolutely. For me, making things was always a means to an end, though. If I wanted to have something, then I kind of had to make it. Australia was and maybe still is, I'm not sure, a sort of a DIY culture. And maybe that was everywhere, actually.
I remember the repair shop. I remember my parents used to take things to be fixed.
It's interesting in my day job now, the notion that you can get something repaired is a form of luxury now. That something that's not disposable, something that doesn't end up on a pile of landfill, you can take it back to Louis Vuitton and get it repaired. But it's great. You should be able to repair things.
But when you design, do you think about the fact that it may have to be repaired, or do you think that
no.
You think a lot about
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, I embrace the idea.
Yeah.
We build things. We design things
for life,
with the idea that they could be fixed. I do a lot of work. I'm designing sort of watches and timepieces and things like that they not only need to be fixed, but they need to be serviced in order to be, in order to sort of function properly.
Yeah.
And it's a notion that now that, especially sort of younger generations of people, you don't think that you've got to get things oiled and greased and serviced, basically. I mean, as a designer, for me, one of the greatest attributes that a product can have is that you can buy it once and have it forever.
Yeah.
I love the idea that you buy a pen, your favorite pen, and that'll be the pen, unless you lose it, of course, which is
that's my problem.
Which is my problem too.
Problem. Can we solve that one? Maybe that would be a good thing, like the repair shop. We could get the find it shop.
Yeah, we need to
finding things. It's just like
Apple need to make a much smaller air tag for all of these things.
Yeah, those things. Yeah, I know.
Put in people as well.
People. Where's that friend I had?
Yeah, where's that child?
Where's that child?
Where's that daughter?
Yeah. Where's that daughter? Yeah, where's that daughter? Well, Okay, so going back to this growing up in Australia.
It was quite traditional. It was mundane's maybe too strong a word, but it felt reasonably sort of run of the mill. But when I was about 7 or 8, I can't remember, my mother got a job. She was working in an architect's office, actually, and these architects created, I guess, what ended up becoming one of the very first sort of boutique hotels in maybe in the Southern Hemisphere. We're talking kind of late 60s, early 70s. And it was in a place called Cairns, which is like the far, far north of Australia, completely tropical, by the way. I mean, it's like in the middle of nowhere.
Is it?
And they created this sort of little boutique hotel, and they sent my mum and obviously me to go and run this little boutique hotel. We drove up in a combi van, a VW combi van, with our dog, and it was so cool. A lot of the furniture was designed by Joe Colombo. I mean, it was incredibly cool. This place in the middle of nowhere. Celebrities like Britt Eklund would come and stay, and Lee Marvin, I can remember.
Lee Marvin.
Yeah. And they engaged a French chef who came out with her husband Jules. Her name was Georgette. She came from France to live there, and she was kind of a hippie. But that was my first exposure to sort of anything other than sort of
traditional. That
was sort of like French haute cuisine.
Yeah, do you remember it?
Absolutely, I remember that, and I remember her chain smoking Gauloise. No, but that was a sort of
How long were you there for?
I think we were there for about 18 months. It felt like a lifetime, but it was a relatively short period of time.
And you went to school there?
Yeah, I went to school in the middle of a cane field on the back of a Bedford. The school bus was a Bedford lorry.
Sounds like the Wild West.
Yeah, it was bonkers.
Did you also make a watch?
Yeah, I modified a watch. I didn't touch the insides, so I was given a watch, actually. Maybe it was my first watch, just not long after I'd learned how to tell the time, because, as you will remember, it's a little bit of a rite of passage.
Big hand on the...
Yeah, learning how to tell the time.
Yeah.
I think I must have been about 8 or 9 years old or something like that. The first thing I did was take it into the garage and pull it to pieces and sort of rehouse it, a newly designed case, which I made. There was a sheet of blue plexiglass, which I guess was maybe 1/4 of an inch thick. So I cut out, sort of a rectangular shape, cut a similarly shaped rectangle for the back and one for the front, and sort of sandwiched it together, right? So it was sort of clear on the top and clear on the bottom, and the movement just sort of sat in the middle. I'm not even sure if I got as far as attaching a watch band to it.
I was going to ask you about the strap.
Before I sort of started to lose interest.
Yeah.
And then...
it was transparent, so that you...
It was. At
that young, your first thing you did showed how something could work.
Yeah, well, that you could see the movement at the back. You could see the movement from the back and the front. And I screwed the whole thing together with these little, these brass screws that I found. Sort of
in the workshop or
in
somewhere.
The workshop, yeah, everything was there, so... It was an exercise in working with found objects, with DIY,
Yeah.
what was available at the time. And I can remember everybody in my family was sort of, simultaneously horrified and thrilled, horrified that
That you're taking it, yeah.
pulled this thing to pieces.
But thrilled that you did. That's good that you were in a family that was thrilled.
Thrilled
that
and
you did
relieved that I'd sort of managed to repurpose it. Maybe that was the first thing that I ever designed, actually.
What?
I can remember exactly.
Did your family go out? I mean, you paint the picture of a very kind of internal life of the workshop, the kitchen, the food, the family. But did you go to restaurants?
In my younger years, I can't really ever remember going to restaurants. We must have at some point, but I don't think, at that time in Sydney, we're talking kind of late 60s, 70s. Restaurant culture wasn't like it is now. I mean, Sydney,
totally agree.
Sydney today, I mean, that's all people do is talk about restaurants and real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, that's their sort of obsession.
When did that happen to you, that you started eating out?
Well, so when we came back from Cairns, my mother and I, and I went to primary school for a few more years, and my mother got remarried when I was about 12 years old or 13, and my stepfather had immediately got transferred to go and live in South Korea. He was working for this big American pharmaceutical company. So then
well, that's a big deal.
Crazy.
So
I went to live in South
Australia.
Korea.
Age what? Age?
Age like 12. But I went there and I went for 3 years. And that was when I can remember going to restaurants for the first time.
In South Korea?
Well, yeah, because we first had to stay in a hotel because there was the house that we were going to live in wasn't ready. So we stayed in a hotel, which was the kind of the most luxurious hotel in Seoul at the time. Bearing in mind that South Korea in the 70s was a military dictatorship, right? There was a curfew from 11 p.m. till sort of 6 a.m. You couldn't go out. I mean, it was a proper kind of military, huge American military presence there. We lived very close to the American Army base, actually. Nevertheless, there were restaurants and there were places to go out, and that's when I started, getting a taste for restaurants.
But South Korean food, it was Korean food.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no international food.
No. I mean, it was
What was the food? What did you eat?
Things like bulgogi, right? Kimchi, of course. Everybody ate kimchi. I wasn't so fond of kimchi, although I love it now. Kimbap, or basically like sort of rolls with seaweed. And, it was like really typical Korean. And we had a Korean maid.
Korean is really big deal now. Do you ever have it here?
I don't, but I should because
maybe you and I could go and find some place, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, good Korean.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of
it is
Korean culture is crazy.
No, in New York, it's all about Korea, about the Korean barbecue, about the way the Korean food. So
But my exposure to sort of cuisine was mostly being taken onto the American Army base by my friends from school, sneaking onto the American Army base and sneaking into the PX.
Yeah.
Right, they had these shops called PXs where you could buy everything American.
Yeah.
So the first time I ever came across Dr. Pepper and red licorice, and that was pretty exciting.
Yeah. So I have a friend who was in Germany as well, said the same thing.
Yeah.
That you'd go to the base and it was like being in a supermarket in Ithaca, New York, or something. Yeah, it's very funny. So you lived in Korea and then went back to...
I got sent back to Australia to boarding school in Sydney, but I'd go and visit them practically every holiday. So maybe 2-3 times a year I'd go off to see them in Tokyo. Then it was, then I really got sort of bitten by the travel bug.
That was explosion. Yeah.
That was it. Tokyo was became my place.
And that was what age?
I was probably 16 or 17 at that point. And then that was...
also must have been design-wise quite impressive for you.
It was. I mean, what struck me about being in Japan, being anywhere actually outside of Australia, was just the way, culturally, the way that different people solve problems, right? They solve problems in different ways. So, for example, you'd go into the subway in Tokyo and you'd sort of observe how things were built and what materials they'd use. All of the railings were stainless steel. It's the first time I'd ever seen that. Yeah. And I can remember the same thing in Paris. When I lived in Paris for quite a while. When I was older, and getting on a metro that was on rubber tires.
Yeah, the silence of the...
which is just kind of a mad concept. But the way that different cultures solve problems in different ways, that was the thing that really struck me about being in Japan, because it really was about as far away as you could. Culturally, it was extremely different. everybody associates Japan with detail,
kind of
and with
minimalism.
minimalism, resolving things, and for me, the mentality that I had, I felt right at home there. It felt like the country I should have been born in. The way that they sort of thought about things, not so much that they thought, that everything was about detail. It was more that it felt to me like they were thinking on a smaller scale. They just considered things, on a much, much smaller scale. And it felt, that was kind of how I thought about things.
Food-wise, I always think that, people who say, if you opened a restaurant somewhere else, New York or San Francisco or Miami or Dubai, and how would you actually control it? And funny enough, I think Tokyo could do it, because I always had this idea that you could get Japanese cooks to come in here, chefs to work here for a certain period of time, and they'd probably end up making fresh tagliarini better than we did. I mean, I don't, you don't want to generalize about a culture, but there seemed to be an attention to that detail. If
and
you do, it becomes so
though.
fancy. But
I mean, you can't eat badly. I mean, you really struggle to eat badly. It's
tell
very
me about
much
Japanese food. What do you feel?
It feels to me like Italy, right? There are these two cultures that food is just so important. And the quality of food. It's all about the quality, isn't it? The quality of the produce and the execution. But it's as soon as
so we're going back. You were sent back to boarding school.
Yeah,
and then you went to college, design school.
I went to art school actually
in Sydney.
In Sydney, yeah. I never studied design formally. I decided I wanted to become a jeweler and a silversmith. Mostly because that was the only part of the art school where you could actually learn how to do something. If you were in the art department, the painting department or the sculpture department, they'd sort of leave you to your own devices and you just kind of get on with it. But in the jewelry department, the silversmithing department, they'd teach you how to actually do things with metal. So I was learning how to make things. I never ended up practicing as a jeweler or a silversmith, but the skills that I learnt doing those things really, set me up so brilliantly for starting to design furniture. First things that I started designing were furniture.
Are they in the book? Let's talk about the book.
Yeah, so this book came out last year, and it was, I guess it's 40 years of work. So 1984 is the year that I graduated from art school. So it's from then until now, and it was very much like a functional encyclopedia. I just wanted to chronicle everything that I'd done. This is maybe one of the...
Which one do you want to talk about?
The better known pieces, things like a watch that I made. I guess I was like 18 or 19 at the time. I mean, these, as you can see, these are sort of very, very kind of postmodern, an attempt at a sort of chaise longue, which... And
this watch was when you were designing jewellery?
Well, yeah. I was working in the jewellery department trying to, make... And this was the chairs. I always wanted to design chairs because chairs were the sort of the iconic thing that designers and architects, made.
It's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Richard did the chair. They did that. Do you know that chair for the Pompidou? Have you ever seen that? Yeah, the one.
Absolutely.
That they did that one. He said it was harder than designing the whole building. Much more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some of them, obviously, most of the world's most famous chairs have been designed by architects.
Yeah, these are beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, these were very much inspired by what was going on at the time in the world of architecture.
Yeah.
But that's a funny piece. So
what is that?
That's a bracelet with a wheel on it, which sounds like a kind of very strange idea. But so I was studying jewelry, and I just wanted to make furniture in the jewelry department. So I was able to sort of twist it and liken. I said basically, furniture is jewelry. They're both kind of useless without the body, right? They don't kind of function without the body. And so they kind of bought that idea and thought it was kind of an interesting one. And so, I'd create pieces of jewelry that, like sort of performance pieces that you could wear, but they functioned a bit like a piece of furniture.
It's beautiful. Do you have this? I keep asking where these pieces
are. It's a really great question because, a lot of this stuff I have no idea where it is. I wasn't good at...
I know.
I wasn't good at keeping my own stuff. I'm still not, I'm not a collector.
I know, the archive, the idea.
I'm a kind of a doer, I sort of do it, and then once it's done, it's gone and sort of lives its own life, and it's out of my hair.
Yeah. But you went from the cocoon of the school. Did you have to go work for someone then?
Yeah, I had a series of sort of rudimentary jobs, but they were not fun jobs, working in department stores and working in news agencies and things like that.
Oh, no, I meant a job in a design office.
No, I never worked in a design office. I never worked for anyone that was doing anything like what I wanted, what I did or what I wanted to do. The first break that I got, I suppose, was I guess it was 85 or 86, a year or two after I finished my college. I applied for a grant from the government,
In Australia.
In Australia, from an institution called the Craft Council, and they were giving money to people. And I was advised by my tutors not to, I was too young to apply, but I did. And I got a grant, and I think it was several $1,000s, which was a lot of money in those days. And I set about trying to pull together an exhibition, which I did. So I found a gallery, which was the best gallery in Sydney at the time, and I had an exhibition in 1986 of 5 or 6 pieces of furniture that I put together. The first piece was the Lockheed Lounge. I was like,
oh, look at you.
19 or something at the time. Yeah, that was the only piece in the show that got bought. So and it was bought by a museum. So that was a good start.
Amazing. Do you think somebody could do this now? Could you leave school to have a gallery, to have your own things?
I'd love to think so. I'd love to think that it was possible. But the difference for me, and maybe for my generation, was that, we had to make things. Or the only way I could communicate with prospective, manufacturers was to show them something. It was no good showing people drawings. They wouldn't kind of buy it. You had to show them the real thing. And to show them the real thing, you had to be able to make it. You had to make the thing. So, that was my obsession, was making things, or small series of things, making. And then maybe along the way you could sell a few, to make a bit of money.
But then you also designed spaces. So did you ever design, you did do restaurants, didn't you? Going back to the food?
Yeah. I did a bunch of restaurants. Well, I designed this restaurant called Coast, which was on Albemarle Street in London in the mid-90s, which is quite a...
I went to Coast.
Did you?
Yeah, I remember.
Well, I tell you what, the most fantastic thing about designing a restaurant, what was tailor-made about that project for me was that you could do everything.
What do you mean?
You could do the cutlery. You could do the vases. You could do the furniture. The tables. Yeah. You could do everything. I love the idea of doing everything, and I've kind of gone on to do kind of that, right? Design all of these little bits.
Yeah.
Of course, you could design the space, but for me, it was really much more about designing all of the things that went in the space. I learned a lot of designing Coast, but a few years later, designed another restaurant in New York called Lever House. Which
when Abbey Rosen bought it, when it moved,
exactly.
Great building, right opposite the Secret building.
Yeah. So you walked in off the street, and then you went down. Yeah. You went down, maybe 4 or 5 flights of stairs, and then it was a huge. The ceilings were maybe 20 foot tall.
Oh.
It was an amazing space.
Yeah.
That was a much more sophisticated project with a bigger budget. And again, I got to design all of the furniture. I got to design the carpets. I got to design, like literally everything, the light fittings, which was...
What year?
Boy, I don't know. Maybe late 90s, I want to say. The walls, we brought Japanese plasterers in to do the walls, which is a sort of very rough plaster that's got sort of grass and stuff.
When you go to restaurants now, does it make a big difference to you? What?
I felt designing restaurants in that manner was very much a thing of the time. I'm far less interested now when I go to restaurants in the design than the food. I think ultimately the food is is the most important thing.
And what about starting Love From then?
I met Johnny for the first time probably, let me think, mid to late 90s. He'd not long been working at Apple. But we didn't start working together for probably another 15 years.
Oh, really?
After that, yeah. Oh. We talked incessantly about, design and how we'd rather do it, what was a good idea and what wasn't a good idea. But we didn't start working together for a really long time after that, until a meaningful opportunity sort of presented itself. And then Johnny brought me on board at Apple to start working with him on the watch.
With the watch, yeah.
Yeah, which was just a sort of a notion.
Are you wearing one at the moment?
I'm not. Yeah, I should be.
What year was the Apple Watch?
2013.
So it was after Steve Jobs died.
Yeah. Not long, but it was.
Did he ever think of the watch? Did he ever?
No, I believe that was entirely Johnny's conception. Yeah.
Did you live in San Francisco?
Never. No. I always lived between London and Paris mostly since the sort of early 90s. Then food culture really kind of started to mean something to me. Yeah. But it was mostly through ritual, the idea that you would every day go out and have lunch,
Yeah, that's
even,
fine.
Often by myself. And I, to this day, it's something
Yeah.
that I love doing. It
That's
sort of
what we're gonna do
it
very
stays,
soon.
it
Yeah.
stays with me. Just, the importance of that, taking that moment, taking that time to, even when you're working, right? It doesn't have to be sort of associated with not working.
Or Renzo Piano, who's was from Italy, when he really did not understand the two words business lunch or working lunch. He just didn't get it. He said, when you work, and when you eat, you eat. And the idea of having a working lunch or a business
Yeah.
lunch, it probably has changed now, but Italians go home for lunch. And actually Renzo and Richard, that's when I started cooking in Paris, because they would work all morning on the Pompidou and then come home for lunch.
Wow.
And so I was kind of in Paris. I was 23, and I thought, okay, well, this will be interesting for me. I'll work, and so that's when but the idea of lunch being really important in that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Lunch and holidays during the summer. They're my two sort of takeaways
Yeah.
from Paris.
But what about domestic life? Who
Remotely.
cooks at home? Did you cook, or did
I
Charlotte
cook.
cook?
Charlotte and I both cook. She cooks more than I do. I love cooking, but I just find that I don't have the kind of headspace to do it very much,
Yeah.
sadly. But I do love it, and I love the idea of it. I'm great at following a recipe.
And
But,
do you, yeah. Do you,
but I do love
yeah.
barbecuing.
Oh, see, that's very male.
It
isn't
is male,
Yeah.
and despite all of the cliches, I know, and
No, but I think women like barbecuing too. But it is interesting how men who might not want to cook will do the barbecue.
yeah, not only male but also very, kind of stereotypically Australian.
Yeah,
right?
and American.
But it wasn't until I was in Tuscany about 10 years ago, and a restaurant there, and they had the most fantastic kind of setup for cooking steak. There's a huge fire on the right hand side, fueled with olive wood. It has to be olive wood, and then there are holes underneath the fire, and the coals fall out onto a surface.
Yeah,
and then you sweep the coals
I
from
love
under
that.
over.
Yeah.
And you sweep it onto another grill,
Yeah.
and the little bits fall through, and the coals stay hot because air's coming through. Anyway, I found the blacksmith that made this the next day. Went there and had them build one for me, because this system is just so improbable and sort of genius.
Well, we have one in Tuscany where we are, and it's what I call a vertical grill. So you put all the coals and the wood vertically.
Oh wow! Okay.
Vertically, and then as they get hot, they fall down. And then you put more there, and then you just keep sweeping it. I'll show it to you. It's really cool.
This is similar. You have to keep sweeping it across.
Yeah.
You keep the fire going, and you just keep sweeping.
And you just keep sweeping it across, yeah.
But what I've discovered is that it has to be olive wood. I mean, olive wood's kind of the only thing that really... And in Greece, of course, we have an abundance of olive wood.
Yeah.
I mean, just
And
like
olive
so
oil.
much. And olive oil.
I've had your olive oil. It's so
I
good.
brought you a bottle, because we're just about to do another crop in November. But
how is it going to be, do you think? We're worried about olive oil this year.
Last year was a disaster.
Yeah.
This year is looking pretty good, I think. We should get about a ton, I guess, a metric ton, which is... But we have like 600 trees, right? So that's a lot.
Amazing. And you press it yourself, or do you
We
go
take it
to
to the community press that we go to. There's one particular one where we know the people, and where you've got to make sure you're the first one there, so as you get the cold press. Because, it's the heat that's generated by the olive press that creates, that sort of cooks the oil. So if you're the first one, you're okay, but you've got to be the first one. But that's fun. It's something that everybody does. Yeah. Like the entire island.
And they pick it. Who picks the olives?
We pick it. A bunch of other people that come and help. Hired hands and for a few weeks. And
in Tuscany, they pay them in the olive oil. And that was a tradition.
Wow.
The olive oil, traveled no more than sort of 10 kilometers from the tree. The idea that now we send it to China, we send it to America, you can buy Tuscan olive oil everywhere. It's such a great ingredient, which makes me think that we haven't actually read the recipe. What do you like about this recipe? What made you choose it?
Well, it's a good segue from the barbecue. It's something it's something that I can do. I can do quite well, I think. But what I love about it is that it's just simple. And there's a little bit at the end, which is quite technical, which I kind of like. Okay, so this is a recipe for beef or steak tagliata. About 30 minutes before cooking, remove the steaks from the refrigerator, uncovered, let them come to room temperature. Get the grill into a high heat or the barbecue, get that kind of fired up and ready to go. Generously season the steaks on both sides with salt and black pepper, and then grill the steaks on one side for 3 minutes, vigorously, I'd say. Then turn them over with tongs, not fingers, for another 2 minutes on the other side. Remove them from the heat and transfer them to a warm plate and let them rest for 5 minutes. And I guess, one can't sort of overstate the importance of letting the meat rest. Something that seems slightly strange to do.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Because you get the juice now. And sometimes I put a bit of lemon or olive oil over it while the juices come out. It's really...
Yeah, and it's extraordinary how much it keeps cooking. It's just something that it's really impossible, difficult to kind of to imagine. But the most important part, and the bit that I love at the end, because it involves sharp knives, is slicing the steak diagonally, not sort of straight up and down, but cutting it between a 35 and a 45 degree angle. So you sort of expose more of the surface area of the steak inside. Yeah,
it's delicious. Do you make it quite often? Is this something that you like to have?
Not as often as I'd like, actually, because I love to do it on said barbecue, and that barbecue happens not to be in the UK. So if I'm in Greece, I do it.
You do it there.
I do it often.
No.
And what do you fry it in? Do you use beef?
Well, we don't fry it.
Oh, you don't fry?
No, we put it on the grill.
Okay,
we
right.
Put it we have a grill here. And when I do it at home on a grill pan, I have that cast iron grill pan which I like to cook with. Then the other day I was making steaks and the fire alarm went off. And I didn't know how to turn the smoke alarm off. And they came, these firemen
Did they turn up?
There was one that was so gorgeous. We thought, let's do this again.
It's so funny. That happened to...
All the girls that were going, whoa, why don't we invite him to dinner? It was really funny. Yeah. My father used to say, we lived in the country, and we had a volunteer fire department. Oh. And he used to say, never, ever, ever call the fire department, because they will be so excited about being called out because they're so bored that they come with hoses. And he had paintings and art stuff around. He said, I'd rather things burn than have water damage. So we were always told, in case of fire, do not call the fire department.
Oh my God.
So as we ended with the recipe, we have always a question we ask at the end. If you were looking for comfort, is there a food that you would reach for when you needed comfort?
It's not even food. Oh. It's a cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
Yeah, tea is my sort of comfort go-to.
What tea?
Well, I'm sort of slightly obsessive with tea, so it could be Assam, could be a type of Assam, could be Darjeeling, could be orange pekoe, could be Lapsang Souchong, or a mix of all of those.
And what is your method?
All of the usual things. The water has to boil, properly boil, heating the pot, in an ideal world. The pot
you always make a pot of tea, not a cup of tea, do you?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely, 100% pot, yeah. The right amount of tea, let it sit for the right amount of time. But I like experimenting with mixing different teas. But that's my kind of comfort, food, and it's something that I look forward to at certain times of the day and in certain places. And, for me, it represents so many things. It's an obsession of my grandmother that I think I inherited from my grandmother. She was obsessed with tea.
Your mother's mother?
My mother's mother, yeah. That's right. She was the one that was never allowed in the kitchen.
Yeah, so she made tea.
So she was really good at tea. Yeah.
Do the tea.
Tea and toast, yeah.
Thank you, Marc.
Thanks, Ruthie.
Let's go have lunch.
Ruthie's Table 4 was produced by Alex Bell and Zad Rogers, with Susanna Hislop, Andrew Sang, and Bella Salini. This has been an Atomized production for iHeart Media.